Here in Toronto, Ontario, and I have over 14 years of collective experience as a social worker. So stay tuned as I cover a topic in this area. And today I'm going to be talking about civil rivalry, particularly within a narcissistic family. I'm going to talk about the different dynamics of siblings. It's likely the case that if you're the scapegoat, that you were under the impression that you had a sibling that was very much loyal to you, someone you could trust, a brother or sister that you thought had your best interest at heart. But then as you became older as an adult, you realized that this sibling was very much not on your side and was in fact probably most likely rooting against you and smearing your name. I spoke with many different clients, and the different families have different dynamics and different situations in terms of siblings. On a sibling dynamic, there's a scapegoat, a golden child, and maybe a lost child. There is a mascot, or there's these different roles basically that are assigned. And the understanding of that is essentially that the narcissistic parent splits the kids into all good and all bad. So because their psyche, this is what they do in terms of infantile defense, they see people as all good and all bad, includes the children. Who's the scapegoat? These roles will fluctuate often. They're not always concrete. However, I have spoke with some clients who definitely say that they were always the scapegoat, a definitive aspect of how they were defined in the family. It's also the case that people can fluctuate with these roles. If you're giving narcissistic supply to your parent, then you're more the golden child 1 minute or that year or that month. But if you are against them in some capacity, if you're more of a truth teller, then you likely become the scapegoat. There could be like two scapegoats. So it doesn't mean there's just one scapegoat. I think also obviously age matters, because if you're very close to your brother or sister in terms of age, it's likely that you shared many similar experiences and you might be more emotionally connected. But if you had, let's say, 7 to 10 years apart, then there's some sense that you're not likely close to that sibling, or maybe not as strong of a bond, right? It's typically the case the golden child would be the one who is likely later in life that the one that betrayed you. Not necessarily, but it's usually the case because the narcissistic parent or parents favor that child. They will want to keep that status as the golden child. And they likely have a level of entitlement, just in the sense that they probably believe the actual parents in terms of being and feeling better. And so they justify their treatment of you by having the status in the family. But you could also have a sibling who doesn't necessarily participate in the drama or the abuse themselves. Rather, they perhaps just play along and they ignore. So there could be more like a lost child. So a sibling who is aware of what's going on but doesn't actively participate in the smear campaign. But there could be a sibling that very much betrays you. I was just speaking to a client recently about how her brother betrayed her, and she had this promise that they were going to be living together, or at least having some shared life together in some sense, because they're planning to move to a different country and this kind of thing. But it came to the case that she made these decisions and found herself in a very difficult situation, most likely because she was believing that her brother was there for her. And it's likely the case, and I was with one of my clients, this shows up in your body in terms of the body keeping the score, in the sense that your nervous system has been exposed to this betrayal, and the way in which you had to likely suppress a lot of this behavior and reality for many years. And I think we all know this intuitively, because a child doesn't have the capacity to fully accept that their family or their parent doesn't love them or doesn't care for them. They essentially need to blame themselves in order to survive and exist as an ego. So it's likely the case that you suppress this and it's been stored in your body. And later in life, you often have health symptoms and different ways that the body manifests this trauma. And I think a lot of us understand, and I think more understanding is coming in terms of what we're understanding with the nervous system, the vagus nerve, how The nervous system can get disrupted by exposure from this toxic and narcissistic family. And I've spoken about other videos about just being in the orbit of a really disturbed person and the way in which the body reacts. It's the cognitive dissonance. So our body's most likely telling us that this person isn't good for us, like our threat detections are going off. But because it's too painful, we tend to rationalize and minimize it. But then let's say we swallow the pain and then it shows up in our gut maybe, or maybe we have heart issues if we have anxiety around our family. Different ways it can show up in terms of stressing our nervous system, where maybe we get sick more, we have migraines. So there's different ways this shows up, but I guess what I really wanted to focus on is just how siblings, it's most likely that you wanted to always have this connection. And I spoke about this in another video with responding to another coach, and she was just mentioning how in these families, you always are looking for that connection with your sibling, but it always seems to be out of reach. And I've talked in other videos about the pseudo-mutuality, so you're the one giving in terms of extending yourself, so you tend to overfunction. So you're very much the one will extend your hand in terms of wanting to connect with your sibling. But seemingly they're always keep you engaged in the sense that they want to give the illusion that they're close. But then over time you realize, no, hey, I'm the one that is often maybe coming to see them. As I mentioned, siblings show up in different ways. I'd say the more classic scenario is that you are maligned by all your siblings and they're essentially siding with your narcissistic parent. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have narcissistic parents if you have a toxic or a narcissistic sibling. I've had cases where one of my clients had enabling parents and a narcissistic sibling. But in a lot of situations, it's the narcissistic parent giving direction. Usually these are very subtle because they're usually covert, but they're the ones that are the bullies, and the siblings essentially fall in line. But even within that, there typically can be a sibling that is more egregious in their behavior, where they actually actively get between you and your parent and likely smear your name to extended family, and then also alienate you from like your nieces and nephew or cousins or aunts and uncles. And you always wonder why, right? Because it's not as though, I guess if you were really cruel to them and like a bully to them throughout your life, it's usually the case that they have this deep-seated resentment towards you, but it doesn't fit the crime, right? You might have said certain things or ways in which you showed up, maybe not stellar throughout your life towards them, but certainly nothing that warrants you having such a bad name and the way in which they scapegoat you. The narcissistic family operates as this orchestration against you. They're all singing from the same hymn book. They are convincing you to some degree that you are in fact have this badness. Rationally, you understand you're not that bad. But when you feel that presence from the family or that lack thereof, and the way in which they convince your extended family, you get these looks, or family friends, simply for standing up to them and not allowing them to bully you, or they have certain bad behavior and you're basically calling them out on it. Because these people are weak individuals, rather than taking responsibility, they smear your name and devalue you. In that other video I spoke about, when the parents die, you would think things would get better. That's typically the healing fantasy, right? You think when my narcissistic parent dies, maybe my sibling and I can get close and work together, drop these roles, and be real with one another and have a mutual loving, caring relationship. But I think, as we often know, and I've seen in a lot of my clients, it typically gets worse when the parent dies. As I spoke about in other videos, there's that power vacuum that occurs where the narcissistic parent leaves the world and the sibling steps up as a secondary narcissist and needs to assert their control and dominance. Because most likely your name's been smeared and the other family members go along with it, you usually don't have much of a choice. You can oppose and protest to some degree, but it comes usually to a point where you're in a toxic family system and there's not much you can do to really influence it other than to actually create further drama and continue to actually spiral down and essentially just be more upset and 100%. More entrenched. That's why often people do say that limiting or going no contact is often the only actual solution, unfortunately. Of course, there is healthier dynamics and maybe there are some alliances in your family. So it could be the case that you limit contact or stay in contact with just some. Often it doesn't mean complete cutoff, or at least very much limiting your time with your family. Simply because usually when you're around them, your nervous system is getting affected and your mental emotional health is getting drained, as well as your identity and your relationships most likely are suffering or struggling because of it. And as I mentioned, there's obviously different families, different dynamics. If you're close in age to your sibling, it's going to show up differently versus if you have, let's say, 7 to 8 years maybe from your sibling. It's most likely the case that you aren't as close if you have that age difference. It's also the case that not all siblings act the same, because you could have a golden child sibling that is aligned with and emotionally fused with your parent to a point that they get in between you and your parent and triangulate you and try to convince usually your parent that you are this horrible or crazy person, right? So essentially they work on discrediting you. Most likely you've been the truth teller and have started to stand up to the narcissistic elders or to the sibling or to the siblings or to the parents. The family will orchestrate against you and they will get in between your parent, especially if you have a narcissistic parent and you're no longer giving them that same kind of secure supply that the golden child is. And so this is all just very difficult and harsh. Usually when you're more naive and before you realize the entirety of this, it's most likely the case that you thought you could go to your parent and talk to them about your sibling and that they would understand. But often you find that your parent actually is actively invested in creating this division between you and your sibling. Usually later in life you realize that they're actually in on it in some sense. It's all incredibly difficult because you spent many decades with your sibling, you thought you could trust them, and usually they're betraying you, and there can be a lot of deep-seated anger towards that. It's most likely the case that if you have an older sibling, you played small and subconsciously throughout your life allowed them to win at sports or a game. So you always played your role to fit into your family. It's almost just the way this was set up from the beginning, the way that parents likely train the kids to act this way towards each other. There's, as I mentioned, it could be more entrenched where you've almost always been the scapegoat or the golden child, or these roles fluctuate throughout the family's timeline. Well, the question is, what do you do once you come to terms with the fact that you don't have any loyalty from your siblings? There is no mutual caring, so there's no mutual reciprocity. As I mentioned, there's a lot you can do. If you have a toxic family system, it's likely you've taken it personal, and I think we all do, because obviously it's your family, and these are people that you've likely given a lot to and shared a lot in your life with them. And then to have those people that are your nearest and dearest essentially betray you, and just to throw it away over such petty things. It could be inheritance or them wanting to be the top dog in the family. When you are acting out of different intentions, like the empath usually gives a lot, right? And thinks other people are that way and have more carefree attitude towards life.
People are not good.
And likely are a little bit more naive though, right?
Yep.
But I think that's a more innocent quality, and it's actually a good quality to have. It's just unfortunate that you're born into this family where that was weaponized and taken advantage of. But I think that certainly you need to hold more true to your boundaries and have more of a grounding in your shadow in some sense. So being able to assert yourself more. You can still have empathy and continue to be that person, but knowing the way in which others operate, these character disturbed individuals operate, then you learn to no longer allow those people in your orbit, and or to, you're just more cautious, but not to a point where you're cynical, hopefully, because many of us can almost give up on life or on relationships or have issues with trust because of it. Part of the work is grieving this relationship that you had with your sibling, processing a lot of this righteous rage and anger you have towards them for the way they betrayed you and took advantage of your goodwill. It's coming to radically accept that the way they are, and just the fact that they don't have the capacity, most likely, to be a mutually caring person towards you, and just the way in which they're more likely more concerned about status, maintaining their dominance and control within the family unit. I think when you do that, you're just seeing more clear eye and more have your eyes wide open in a lot of ways. And part of this was processing your shadow and seeing a repressed material that you've likely suppressed and stored in your nervous system. It's likely manifested into various health symptoms. You could consider writing a letter to your sibling, communicating all the things you want them to know, and coming to terms with the way you are. You're different from them, essentially, and how you didn't deserve the treatment that you were given. So in this journey of being a scapegoat within a narcissistic family, it's incredibly difficult accepting that your siblings, the ones that you thought had your back, that were loyal to you, were in fact most likely smearing your name, triangulating you with others, particularly most likely with your parent or your parents, or not wanting you to have any authentic or mutual relationship with your narcissistic parent. There wasn't much of a relationship there in the first place. To say the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree, and the siblings have taken their cues from their narcissistic parent. You realize perhaps you always thought, okay, my sibling, my brother, my sister, they're a bully to me. I'm going to limit or go no contact with them. This is most likely after several instances where you were betrayed, or they smeared your name perhaps, or just were cruel to you. And you thought, okay, I can go to my parent and they can understand. But then the family most likely doesn't acknowledge it and will actually try to force you guys to be okay.